Hello, very beautiful community. Happy Halloween. Let's say a few words about the Xi and Trump meeting, the Xi and Putin meeting I was about to say. Now, it was not a great length of time that they spent engaging. It was largely a staff-driven meeting where they went over what was already prepared for them. There are significant cultural differences, or rather political technology differences between the Chinese and the American administration, which creates tension. Namely that this American administration in particular is drifting toward a post-truth mode of discourse, similar to what the Kremlin does. On the other hand, the Chinese regime roughly is stuck somewhere in the middle between deception and post-truth. They are not as flexible as the Russians are about absorbing sort of ill-assorted messages about China coming from different people in the US administration. They dislike it, they get freaked out about it. The way the Russians don't, because the Chinese still practice to a greater extent alternate reality propaganda rather than post-truth propaganda. Now, of course, it's also true that with the Trump administration, there's less quality back-channel dialogue between the United States and China. And we've got a dynamic where there is enormous mutual dependence, but very little trust. Now, there was movement on tariffs, on rare earths, on ports and chips, and there was a freeze on certain measures and certain modes of escalation for a year. Many analysts have argued that the Chinese extracted concessions from the United States without the United States getting much back. That's to say, Trump's tariff war is not successful. I'm not going to pass my own judgment on that, partly because about 98% of the commentary on different platforms in newspapers and indeed on television on Russia has the kind of superficial grasp of Russia that I have of China. And so it'd be inappropriate and unethical for me to overindulge at this point. What I rather want to do is make a set of big picture geopolitical remarks and then make a psychological remark about how we understand how Trump relates to Xi. Now, obviously one big picture remark that's bittersweet or delicious is the sort of extraordinary immolation of this thesis that modernization leads to westernization. The thesis broke down many years ago, got defeated by history when we saw that countries were modernizing without westernizing. But what we're seeing today is that the West itself is de-westernizing in the sense that there's democratic backsliding in the West. Now, that's the sort of thing that it's hard not to think of when you see the handshake between Trump and Xi, and you see Trump holding Xi's hand for 27 seconds. We are entering a world of frenemies, a dynamic in which countries are going to be friends and enemies in certain respects simultaneously. And it's a world where there is an enlarged, diffuse risk of conflict and a much greater degree of unpredictability. Specifically, the dynamic between the United States and China is a dynamic of decoupling that's going to elaborate over the months and years to come. to understand this more three-dimensionally, you've got to understand a little bit of Trump's psychology here. How is Trump approaching US-China relations, with the exception of what we know, that he has certain very simple beliefs that he has kept from the 1980s. And of course, one of these beliefs is about tariffs. Trump's problem is that he can't take advice on the implication of playing tariff war, and he can't scenario plan for what the consequences are going to be of taking tariff actions. To some degree, Trump can get away with this against relatively weaker countries. It's harder to get away with this against bigger countries. And even with weaker countries, what you can do is get away with it once, and then they're going to start decoupling from you because they're going to find US power unreliable. But Trump's relationship with Xi is quite interesting. We know that his relationship with Zelensky is based on a kind of sadistic expression of narcissistic supply, whereby Zelensky has got to go through a bunch of endlessly repeating gratitude hoops. And sometimes it's not gratitude, sometimes it's just Trump saying something awkward or unlovely to Zelensky, and Zelensky just needing to laugh and smile at it. And that happens over and over and over and over. With Putin, it's a different dynamic. It's a dynamic whereby Trump fantasizes, and now that things are going less well with his efforts to stop the war, Trump is frustratingly fantasizing about a fantasy society into which he and Putin are both together admitted. With Xi, Trump courts because he knows that his alpha male act doesn't work. And the image he is after is something like the image of Reagan and Gorbachev. And Trump wants to be Reagan, and Xi can be Gorbachev. Can I bring it about that whatever is happening between the United States and China is accompanied by a set of pictures that echo something like this thing that I remember from the 80s, the Reagan-Gorbachev relationship? That's the central thing that Trump is pursuing with China. He's not pursuing concrete policy change. He's pursuing appearances in the first instance, which is why it's so easy to defeat him, because purpose-driven leaders, purpose-driven, hard-nosed autocrats like Trump and Xi realize that Trump's dealing in appearances, and you can grant him some appearance-driven victories, and then yourself gather up gains on substance. So that's the central aim. Actual policy is secondary for Trump. He wants a kind of pictorial accompaniment to his relationship with Xi that has echoes of the 1980s Reagan-Gorbachev relationship. Now, if you're somebody who wants strong and stable and efficacious, and also democratically serious US power, then it's a highly embarrassing, highly unfortunate situation. But that's where we are. Talk to you soon. Lots of love.